Schedule. Welcome, Madam Secretary. And today, of course, we are having a hearing on the budget. The hearing always covers a range of economic issues, so we'll start with a look at the state of the economy as we meet this morning. Right now, the United States has the strongest major economy in the world. Don't have to take my word for it. Trump advisor Stephen Moore agreed with that statement in a recent interview. Wages rising significantly faster than inflation, which has come down. The labor market has never been better for workers. There's been real progress on income inequality. This is a period of booming entrepreneurship in America as new business applications are up. Go back 4 years when COVID cases were filling up the hospitals and Americans were stuck at home wondering if and when they'd be able to stock up on toilet paper. Forecasts for the economy were dire. The economy under President Biden has smashed those negative forecasts to bits. Nearly every other country in the world with a developed economy would love to trade places with the United States in 2024. Now, if you listen to Donald Trump, you would believe that the United States is on a fast track to the dark ages. What does he want to do when it comes to big economic policy? For one, Trump allies are developing a new tax agenda, cooking up big plans for tax hikes on working Americans and middle-class families. There'll be more tax breaks for multinational corporations and big handouts to those up at the very, very top, the billionaires. Donald Trump wants to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. Colleagues, we spent a lot of time working on that in this committee room. He wants to, as part of that repeal, include the funding for the IRS that has vastly improved customer service and cracked down on wealthy tax cheats. All in all, Donald Trump's proposals would run bigger deficits and pile up more debt. That would make it impossible to shore up bedrock American programs like Medicare and Social Security. Recently, Donald Trump told an interviewer in the first interview on economics in quite some time that Donald Trump believes there's lots of room for cuts to these vital programs, particularly Social Security. His campaign had to walk it back because they know his real plans on these issues are a loser for the public. In my view, Americans want a strong economy. They want a fair shake for people who don't have big fortunes and political power. And they want policies that drive down the cost of living in our country. That is not what Donald Trump has on offer, but that's exactly what we're zeroing in on. For example, last year I introduced the billionaire's income tax. There are now 18 Senate co-sponsors. President Biden's budget includes his own proposal, which has focused on ending the scheme that allows billionaires to pay what they want when they want to, and sometimes nothing at all for years on end. And it all involves, as the Secretary knows, 3 words. If a billionaire doesn't want to pay taxes for a long time, they can just buy, borrow, and die. Do those 3 things, and you don't pay much, if any, taxes. And here's how it works. A billionaire acquires an asset that just gains in value. Maybe they just buy 5, 6 houses. Can't live in but one at a time, but they buy all these houses, just sit on them, borrow against them, and then when they die, all the taxes are reconfigured. And meanwhile, people who earn a wage are paying taxes out of each and every paycheck. That's a basic unfairness. And I share the president's view that we're capitalists. We want people to be successful, make plenty of money, but we also believe in fairness. And that's what's on the line now, and the billionaire tax ought to be the centerpiece of the effort to save Social Security for future generations and uphold the Medicare guarantee. We also want to keep upgrading taxpayer service, already vastly improved thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act funding, while giving every American the opportunity to file tax returns directly with the IRS. By the way, this whole approach has been bipartisan in this committee for many years. I'm looking at our friend from Tennessee, Dan Coates at one time was on this committee and wrote a bipartisan bill with me to do just that. Direct file opened widely in a handful of states last week. In just a matter of days, tens of thousands of Americans have filed or started their returns using this new system, and they are saving big on fees when they do so. That's progress that has to continue. Donald Trump's allies want to stop it. They'll side with the tax prep companies against typical taxpayers, and it's safe to say that Donald Trump himself is no champion of tax enforcement against the billionaires and the people at the top. Before I wrap up, I want to mention one other topic that members of this committee know a fair amount about. It has now been 7 full weeks since 357 members of the House voted to pass legislation that was developed by Republican Chair Jason Smith and myself over a period of many months. The legislation restores important incentives, particularly for small business, research and development incentives, and expands the child tax credit. Now, I've listened to many of my Republican Senate colleagues, and I've made it clear that I will work with anybody who wants to find a way to get this done quickly. You've heard all this talk, Madam Secretary, about, well, maybe you put it off till 2025. There's some big businesses that might be able to survive that. But these innovative, small companies that look at that R&D break as a lifeline, they're not going to make it until 2025. The number one concern I've heard from Republicans is the child tax credit look-back policy. I heard that from a number of colleagues. They think that as structured by Chairman Smith and I, that this would somehow discourage work. I don't happen to agree with that. The Joint Committee on Taxation doesn't happen to agree with it. But in order to make for a bipartisan bill, it's been a long time since we've had a bipartisan tax bill, around here. Some of my colleagues haven't even seen one. I have offered to take the look-back provision out of what Chairman Smith and I developed if it helps us get this bipartisan bill over the finish line. Working with community leaders, Madam Secretary, we have found a way to do this and still lift the same number of kids out of poverty. I want colleagues of both parties on the committee to know that the offer to remove the look-back policy that was in the Smith-Wyden legislation is still on the table as of this morning, if we can find common ground and move ahead. And as I mentioned, this idea of waiting till 2025, Madam Secretary, particularly for these innovation-oriented small businesses, Senator Hassan has led the effort to point this out over several years, I think would cause us to do significant damage to the economy and certainly to the innovation ethic that colleagues on both sides of this dais have supported. Now, I'll wrap up by way of saying I believe that there are more than 60 members of the Senate who want to act on this in a bipartisan way. So I'm going to keep, at it. Members may be tired of hearing about it after a few days, but I sure believe that it's important to do bipartisan tax work now that actually helps people. And if anything, it sets the table for 2025. With that, I turn it over to Senator Crapo.